Good evening and welcome to the 17th Annual Tennessee Aviation Hall of Fame Gala and Induction Ceremony. My name is Alan Howell. I'm the chairman of the Tennessee Aviation Hall of Fame, and I would like to thank all of you for being here tonight to honor 6 outstanding individuals who have made lasting contributions to the aviation community in our state and across the country. The Tennessee Aviation Hall of Fame is one of the most recognized and renowned organizations of its kind in the United States, thanks to the dedicated efforts of our founder, Chairman Emeritus, Mr. Bob Minter, the current and past board members, and our many financial supporters over the years. Your attendance tonight and sponsorships for this gala support the ongoing efforts of this outstanding organization. Over the past 16 years, we have inducted 66 members into the Hall of Fame. I am proud to be the son of Hall of Fame member Reese Howell, who was inducted in 2008. The accomplishments and contributions of these men and women who are members of the Hall of Fame are amazing. I continue to be in awe of each of these great people. They are our teachers, our instructors, our mentors, our role models, defenders of our freedom, and our heroes. The stories of their accomplishments and distinguished careers are preserved through the Hall of Fame for future generations to remember and learn from. In addition to preserving the legacy of its members, the Tennessee Aviation Hall of Fame also promotes education to the next generation of aviators. This June, through the generous support of the Robert A. and Susan C. Wilson Foundation and other donors, we were able to print 20,000 copies of the coloring books you have at your table. To date, we have distributed over 8,000 copies to students in classrooms across the state of Tennessee. Bob, thank you and your wife for your generosity to make this happen. We would appreciate all of you helping us to get these books into the classrooms of students across the state. Tonight, we're excited about beginning a new partnership with the Tennessee State Museum, the new museum location in Nashville. Chief Curator Dan Pomeroy, Community Engagement Manager Rachel Helvering, and Brad Caven are with us from the museum tonight. Thank you for joining us. We are also proud to partner with the Middle Tennessee State University Gore Center in preserving the artifacts, books, and writings of our Hall of Fame members. University archivist Donna Baker is here with us tonight. Donna, thanks to you and your team for your valuable work in preserving the history of our members. I would like to thank our reception sponsors tonight, the Metropolitan Nashville Airport Authority, CEO Doug Crulin, and his members of his executive team are here with us tonight. The Metropolitan Knoxville Airport Authority, CEO Bill Marison is with us here tonight, and in just a few days, Bill will be retiring after serving 36 years at the McGee-Tyson Airport. Congratulations, Bill, for an outstanding career of service to aviation in Tennessee. Bill. Bill also serves on the Tennessee Aviation Hall of Fame Board, and incoming CEO Patrick Wilson is also with us here in Knoxville. And the Memphis Shelby County Airport, and Chief Financial Officer Forrest Arts is here with us tonight. Thank you to our reception sponsors.
Because I fly, I laugh more than other people. I look up and see more than they. I know how the clouds feel, what it's like to have the blue in my lap, to look down on birds, to feel freedom in a thing called the stick. Who but I can slice between God's billowed legs and feel them laugh and crash with his step? Who else has seen the unclimbed peaks, the rainbow's secret, the real reason birds sing? Because I fly, I envy no person on earth. All of us here tonight, well, a big part of us, are like John Wilder said when we inducted him. He said, I just like to fly. And so we're honoring people tonight who just like to fly and who've had a lot to do with flying and the education of it. And these are people who have become outstanding in their fields. First of all, we'll have Cecil Brunson. If you saw this morning's Nashville Tennessean on page 4A, a Memphis writer did a great story about our first honoree this evening. And to provide some additional insight into Colonel Brunson's extraordinary career, here is FedEx Vice President of Flight Operations, Mr. Tim Leonard.
Well, good evening. How are you? Well, it's a pleasure to be here this evening. I just have a few short remarks. I'll keep this real brief, but it's certainly an honor to be here this evening with all the distinguished honorees, all of who've served the industry that we all love so very much. And it reminds us all of the power that we all have and share, whether it's on the job or in our communities, the importance of positive change and giving back to the next generation so that this great industry can continue. So congratulations to each of you for your induction tonight. I do want to also recognize I was really tickled to hear that you send out the nomination acknowledgments via FedEx, and that's a great thing. So we want to keep doing that. So tonight I have the privilege to introduce to you Cecil Brunson. As mentioned, Cecil is from Memphis. He graduated from Memphis State University in 1970 and received his commission to the United States Air Force. He graduated in 1970, received his commission to the United States Air Force. Then he married Jean, his wife, shortly after college, and while on their honeymoon, received his orders for his first training assignment, and that was to become a navigator in an F-4 for the United States Air Force. So off they went to California. In February of 1972, Cecil received orders for a combat tour in Southeast Asia. While in theater, Cecil conducted 160 missions defending our freedom. On October 12, 1972, Cecil flew his last mission over Vietnam, escorting bombers to a target northeast of Hanoi. Over the target area, they were attacked by multiple MiG-21s, hitting Cecil's F-4, forcing them to eject. Upon, of course, reaching the ground, Cecil was captured by the North Vietnamese and ultimately spent 5.5 months in what's affectionately known as the Hanoi Hilton. After his release, Cecil returned to the United States, where he continued his career as a pilot in the Air Force and the Tennessee National Guard. He retired from the Air Force as Lieutenant Colonel in 1980, returning to Memphis with his wife, Jean. Cecil will proudly tell you that Jean refused to believe that when he was reported missing in action, that she had any doubt that he would return. In fact, he maintains it was her unwavering faith that kept them together and is still the driving force behind their very close-knit family. When it was all said and done, Cecil logged more than 380 hours of combat time. He earned some of the nation's highest military honors, including the Silver Star, 2 Distinguished Flying Crosses, the Bronze Star for Valor, 2 Purple Hearts, 13 Air Medals, the Air Force Commendation Medal, the Prisoner of War Medal, and the South Vietnamese Cross of Gallantry. He's also credited for 1 MiG destroyed over North Vietnam. Now, I can say honestly, there aren't many people that have a resume quite like that. And I can also share with you, without reservation, there are many people who did not return from that undescribable conflict. Suffice it to say, we're all grateful that Cecil was able to return home safely to all of us. Being a Memphian, he only wanted to fly for one airline, and that's FedEx Express. He landed that job on August 26 of 1986, and for nearly a quarter century, he demonstrated the characteristics of what we expect of our employees at FedEx. He set the stage for all of us to follow. While flying there, he flew as a flight engineer, as a first officer, and as a captain on our Boeing 727s, our DC-10s, Airbus 300s, Airbus 310s, and he retired in 2010 as a Boeing 777 captain. Cecil and Jean have 2 children. Their son Kevin and his wife Angela have 2 children. Kayla is age 6 and Kai age 4. Kevin is a chief technology officer for Higher Ground Technologies, and they reside in Collierville, Tennessee. Meanwhile, Cecil's daughter, Angela, received her undergraduate degree from Pepperdine University. her master's degree from the University of Memphis, and is currently writing her dissertation on music in the POW camps of Hanoi for her doctorate in musicology. It's quite a tribute to you, Cecil. But let's not forget his rock and the love of his life, Jean, who is quite the talent herself. Not only is she a retired Christian counselor at Central Church in Memphis, but she's hard at work writing a book about her counseling experiences throughout the years titled What Lies in the Shadows. And wouldn't you know it, has been published, and I'm looking forward to reading it. As anyone can see, this is an extraordinary family led by a remarkable couple. And whether it was risking his life for freedom or delivering precious cargo around the globe, Cecil Brunson is truly an example of life well blessed. Inspiring others to do the right thing and always giving 100%, Cecil is a prototypical embodiment of what the Tennessee Aviation Hall of Fame symbolizes. As such, I couldn't be more honored to encapsulate his amazing journey for you this evening. Please join me in welcoming to this prestigious fraternity an American hero, Cecil Brunson.
If Jean would join us on the stage, we'll let her bedeck him. And each one of these inductees gets a whole box full of stuff, part of which is a plaque and some other things. And now you can speak. Thank you.
I want to thank the Tennessee Aviation Hall of Fame for selecting me for this honor, and Bob Wilson, especially, a longtime friend and fellow aviator, for nominating me for this honor. I'd be remiss if I didn't thank my wife, Jean, my two kids, Kevin and Angela, for standing by me during the many times of absence during my 40 years of aviation career. I'd also like to thank my fellow flight crew members with whom I've shared a great deal of my life and my career. When I graduated from high school, there were tens of thousands of Americans fighting in Southeast Asia. When I graduated from college, there were hundreds of thousands of Americans already in Southeast Asia. And I remember when I went out to the airport to leave for Southeast Asia for a combat tour in the F-4 with my wife and my mom and dad out there, I really wasn't worried about it. I already knew what war was about. I'd seen all the movies. I'd seen John Wayne storming the hills of Iwo Jima, Jimmy Stewart flying his B-29 through the flak-infested skies of Germany. I'd seen Vic Morrow leading his platoon through war-torn Europe. And these guys never got a scratch on them. They were always there for that next sequel, the next movie. What is war? Well, when I got to Southeast Asia, I found what war was all about. It's cold, it's heartless, there's cruelty, there's hatred. There's not much good about war, but sometimes you have to do it. I remember my first mission. I'll never forget it when I got to Southeast Asia. It was a simple milk run. It was 4 F-4s loaded down with bombs going to a suspected ammo dump on top of a mountain in the Barrel Roll region of Laos. We got airborne. We got up to the target area. Number 1 rolled in. Number 2 rolled in. And as we rolled in, Leeds bombs were going off. And all of a sudden, the AAA started coming up. Golf ball-sized tracers were flashing by our cockpit. And as we jinked going down the chute, dropped our bombs, and pulled off, I looked back, and I saw bombs exploding. I saw secondary explosions all over the top of that mountain. It was erupting in flame. And that's when I realized my hands were shaking, My mouth was so dry I couldn't speak. I learned what fear was that day. I also found out that they were shooting at Cease Brunson, and all of a sudden this war took on a pretty personal note to me. During the next 9 months, I flew every kind of a mission you could imagine in Southeast Asia, bombing missions, escort missions, everything. Logging over 160 missions, 60 of them over the north. And on October 12th, 1972, my whole life changed. I'd been up north a whole lot of times. Today was no exception. Our target was the Kepa rail yards, which is 15 miles northeast of Hanoi, where the Chinese were resupplying the North Vietnamese. We were escorting the bombers that day, and as we got in over the target area, the weather was terrible, and they couldn't drop their bombs. So we started turning out. And as we started our right turn for them to exit to the Gulf of Tonkin north of Haiphong, 2 enemy fighters we noticed coming in from our 10 o'clock high. We reversed our turn to engage these 2 MiGs, and we were just seconds away from firing on these 2 MiG-21s when a 3rd MiG came into the fight at our Deep 6 unobserved, fired a missile that impacted our plane. There was a loud explosion, the plane pitched forward and began to cartwheel through the sky. And at 23,000 feet, doing 500 miles an hour, we ejected from our crippled plane. Free fell down to 10,000 feet where the seat kicked us out and deployed the parachute. And we began to drift down. When I got down to 6,000 feet or so, I broke through the last layer of clouds. And I could see the city of Hanoi in the distance. And I knew it was going to be a long day. When I finally reached the ground, the adrenaline had gone through me. There was nothing left, and I laid there. Finally got enough energy to release my parachute risers, to start crawling, to start walking, and then to run. And I got probably 200 or 300 yards from where I'd landed, found a thicket of thorn bushes, crawled up under it, began to plot my escape from North Vietnam. I figured if I could make it to the northeast, to the coast, just south of the Chinese border, the Campfire Mines, which was kind of a deserted area, I could use my radios and call in the rescue. So I started my E&E to the northeast. And I guess I'd gone for maybe 2-3 hours around all the villages. I was trying to skirt around them when I began to hear gunshots in the distance and shouts. So I found a small valley with some tall weeds in it, got down in there and pulled them up around me and waited. About 10 minutes later, I looked on the hillsides around me, and hundreds of people were out searching for me, just shoulder width apart, combing the area. And as they got closer and closer, probably as close as from me to you, he looked in there and he saw me. He pulled his pistol up and unloaded his pistol on me. Bullets were whipping past my head, but they didn't hit me. They swarmed over me, began to beat me and kick me and hit me with rifle butts. And I was just about to lose consciousness when the 2 NVA troops pulled people off of me. They sliced my clothes off of me with a machete. They tied my elbows and my wrists together behind my back and marched me to a nearby village. And all along the way on this pathway, hundreds of people were there to see the captured American. And all along the way, people were spitting on me and pulling my hair, hitting me with bamboo rods, with broadside of machete blades. And I really didn't think I was going to live through it. They got me into a small village, makeshift cell, and all throughout the afternoon they'd untie my legs and throw me out to another set of people to have at me. When it got dark that night, they took me out back to a small concrete bunker where they burned their trash, tied me up like you'd tie a calf at a rodeo, and threw me in there. Early in the morning, before daybreak, a Jeep drove up outside. They put me in the back of the Jeep and drove me into Hanoi. Got my first glimpse of the Wallow prison, the Hanoi Hilton. The walls were about 12 foot tall. The top 3 feet were embedded with broken glass, rolls of concertina wire, and what appeared to be a hot wire running through it. I spent that first night in a solitary confinement cell. It was about a 10-foot square concrete room, an iron door on the front, a window on the back with bars. There were 2 boards on the floor, and that was my bed. There was a 3-gallon can in the corner of the room, and that was my bathroom. There was a single solitary light bulb hanging from a wire hanging from the ceiling. And I remember that night as I'm laying on that cold, dark floor, my mind went to all the men who had probably already gone through this very cell. Some of them had already been there 7 years, and really there was no hope in sight. And I began to lose hope. And tears formed in my eyes, and I did something I hadn't done in 9 months in Hanoi, or in Southeast Asia, and that was pray. And as I prayed, God heard me through my tears and my prayers, and He reminded me of a scripture I'd learned as a child, the 23rd Psalm. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I'll fear no evil, for thou art with me. God was with me in that cell that night. He never left me. Through all the interrogations, through all the beatings, God was always there with me. A couple months later, I was taken from the Hanoi Hilton over to the Kulak prison. They called it the zoo. And during my time there, December 19th, that's when the B-52 bombing started. They called it the 11-day war. And during that time, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of bombs were falling every night over Hanoi. The noise was deafening. The ground was heaving like an earthquake. The SAMs were going up. The AAA was going up. It was chaotic. This went on night after night after night. December 23rd, we were taken back over to the Hanoi Hilton. I was in a cell with about 40 other Americans, a large cell. And it really seemed like the intensity was getting worse and worse. Bombs were falling all around us. And we really thought this might be our last night. And as I sat there in that cell, I began to sing the Lord's Prayer. And others around me joined in. And as we sang this praise song to the Lord, a crazy thing happened. It's like God pushed the mute button on everything around me. The noise, the turbulence, the heaving, it seemed like it all stopped. There was just such peace in that room that night. I felt like God's presence was right there. And that night, I rededicated my life to Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior. And I knew if anything happened to me that night, where I was going to spend eternity. We came home. I went back to pilot training. Got back in the F-4 again. Spent another 5 years flying the F-4. Awesome plane. In 1980, I resigned from the Air Force, came home to Memphis with my family, and started flying for the Tennessee Air National Guard. An amazing experience flying with some really amazing people. Got to know some really great guys, great flight crew members, great staff. Had a great time flying all over America, Central America, South America, Europe. In 1986, I got hired on at FedEx as a flight crew member. And for the next 25 years, I had an amazing ride. And I'd like to give a big shout out to Fred Smith, the founder of FedEx, for taking an idea and building it into a global transportation company. You may not realize this, but there's probably not a moment of the day when a FedEx plane is not airborne someplace in the world. I got to do things and see things that most people only dream of. Flying to cities across America, going into Prestwick, Scotland, Paris, London, Dubai, Frankfurt, Beijing, Guangzhou, Shenzhen, Hong Kong, Taipei, Tokyo, Seoul. Amazing, amazing time. I thoroughly enjoyed. We had some great pilots. I flew with some of the best pilots in the world. And the neat thing about it is most of these guys were military, so we got to share a lot of stories flying around the world together. It was a great experience. And I can't tell you what it was like to fly for a company like FedEx. The team that FedEx was, you were proud to be a part of it. And I'm still proud to be a part of it. Before I close, I'd like to flash back to one thing, my release from Hanoi. March the 29th, 1973, my group was released. It was a part of the peace agreement that was signed in January of 73, the repatriation of prisoners. We were taken out to the Guillam airfield by bus. We saw the C-141 land with a big red cross on the tail. There was a repatriation ceremony right there on the ramp. There were North Vietnamese delegates over here, American delegates over here. In the middle, there was a U.S. Air Force colonel standing there. And as our names were called, we marched up, we saluted the Air Force colonel, returned our salute, put his hand out and said, "Welcome home, son." I was escorted to the awaiting plane. As I turned to go up the ramp of the 141, my eyes fell upon a field of red, white, and blue, red, white, and blue. And as I stood there with a lump in my throat and butterflies in my stomach, and tears in my eyes, I knew I was going home to my America. We have something here in America that nobody else has in the world. It's a land of freedom and opportunities beyond compare. But you know, freedom is not free. There's a price. And many have gone before us already to pay that price. And many right now are paying that price around the world in outposts, protecting and defending freedom for us today. I would hope that when you leave here tonight, when you go to work Monday, when you're spending time with your family, when you're enjoying them, I would hope that you would remember the price that's being paid for that freedom. God bless each and every one of you, and God bless the United States of America. Thank you.
We all love the legendary spin doctor Bill Kirshner, who was inducted in 2002 and who passed away in 2007. Dr. Catherine Cavagnaro has continued his work and has improved upon it. Her son, Jack Haight, will now provide us with an introduction.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and congratulations to everyone tonight who is given this prestigious honor. I stand before you to introduce the next inductee, my mother, Catherine Cavagnaro, who has dedicated a great part of her life to the world of aviation. Ever since she was a young girl, growing up in Middle California, watching fighter jets take off from Moffett Airfield, flying has been a great passion and source of inspiration for her. Since those days, her passion and interest for flying has only grown stronger. For nearly 20 years now, she's accumulated thousands of hours flying various aircraft, as well as training others to fly, spin, and do other acrobatic activities, something that, as her son, I can definitely say, gave me a very big, sudden welcome to flying. A student of the late Bill Kirshner, she has followed her instructor's footsteps, researching the technical and physical aspects of aviation, and often writing about it in various magazines such as AOPA Pilot and Aviation Safety Magazine. Outside of flying, she teaches mathematics at the University of the South in Sewanee and received a doctorate in pure mathematics from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign in 1995. As someone who has known her for her whole life as a pilot, I can personally say that moments sitting next to her in a cockpit, even from a very young age, have been absolutely extraordinary. And I can always rely on a safe flight because she is flying that plane. Over 80 years ago, the great aviatress, Amelia Earhart, one of the first women to be involved in modern flight, said that adventure is worthwhile in itself, and that if adventures are worth it, then you must do it. And I know that for my mother, the ability to fly and teach others is an adventure that means the world to her. So without further ado, please welcome the next inductee into the Tennessee Aviation Hall of Fame, Catherine Cavagnaro. My bad.
Were it not for the wonderful teachers and mentors that I've had throughout my life, I certainly wouldn't be standing here in front of you today. I would like to thank some of them and offer my gratitude. Thanks to my mother for stressing the importance of an education, for making it possible for me to attend Santa Clara University, and for taking me on my first airplane ride and encouraging my independent nature. During my childhood years, my father would regularly bring me large integers, declaring that this new one was the best yet because of some interesting divisibility property or some pattern with its numbers. He modeled the love and curiosity for mathematics that I found infectious. I also remember the silly, silly things he used to tell me. Things like, no, don't do that. Hey, you're going to get hurt. My selective hearing meant that I racked up a broken leg and 5 different sets of stitches by the time I was 6 years old. Years later, when I realized that he may have known a thing or two at the time, I apologized to him for being so stubborn. He told me that it was okay and that he had learned a thing or two over the years. The futility of telling me no, and that he and my mom knew that whatever happened to me, I would always somehow land on my feet. I appreciate his charity and generosity and ability to forgive. Perhaps the teacher who had the greatest impact on my professional life was someone with whom I spent the least time and who probably doesn't even remember me. I grew up as a painfully shy child, and this did not go unnoticed by my English teacher in high school. After a presentation through which I muddled in his class, he pulled me aside and said, "Catherine, you are smart. You can do just about anything in life. Just make sure that whatever you do never involves public speaking." That initial sting made me determined to deal with my issue and come out of my shell. It is quite possible that without that conversation, my career choice might have been quite different, and I'm actually grateful to him for that. After I finished mathematics graduate school at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, my goal was to find a teaching position at a university like Santa Clara, where the students and faculty have a close connection. Although I had planned to move back out west, Sewanee caught my eye with its engaged faculty, talented students, and gorgeous campus atop the Cumberland Plateau. That the university had its own airport did not escape my notice. Within a few years, I was taking flying lessons. It happened to be at the airport that was home to aviation author Bill Kirshner. Bill introduced me to aerobatics and helped me combine my interests in mathematics and aviation. And in turn, he made me love each one of those subjects more. I can still hear him sitting next to me, calling out, "Wingtip, wingtip," in order that I would look at the left wingtip when I pull the nose up above the horizon into a loop. Now, Bill was pretty competitive. It's possible I'm a little competitive as well. Unlike my mentor, I knew that I would never get a chance to fly Corsairs off straight-deck carriers at night in the Pacific. So I decided I needed to do something that Bill had never done. His longest spin was a 25-turn spin. I decided I needed 26. One day he called me up and said, "My airplane needs to be flown. Would you go out to the airport and fly it for me?" Here was my chance. I took off and climbed up to, it was a painful climb, mind you, up to 10,000 feet in his Cessna Aerobat. With full power, I eased the nose up, and at the stall warning, I pulled the yoke all the way back and gave full left rudder and held those control inputs. I counted the turns, 19, 20, 21, 22. By the time I saw the quarry for the 23rd time, the plane self-recovered. I tried it again with similar results. I could almost hear him sitting next to me saying, "Not in my airplane, you don't." Eventually, when I found my own Cessna 152 Aerobat, Wilbur, I did manage 26 turns and a spin. Soon my record became 30 and 40 and 55 and then 60, which I had filmed. I didn't know how he would take it, so I put it on a tape for him, put it in festive wrap, gave it to him for his birthday, and ran. That was in September of 2006. He called me later that day and said, "Wow, that was some spin." That same month, I took what I later realized was his last airplane flight ever. 1.6 hours of hard aerobatics within 4 months of his passing, and he was still the smoothest, most amazing pilot with whom I have ever flown. I am humbled and privileged to join him here. My thanks to all the folks at the Nashville FSDO who have been so supportive over the years. Bob Hill brought me into the FAA safety program over a dozen years ago to present safety briefings around the country. Bob has always been supportive, singing my praises, and ultimately nominating me for my 2018 FAA Safety Representative of the Year award. I'm sorry that he is not able to be here tonight, but I do send him my good wishes. I would also like to recognize Jim Bostrom, also from the Nashville FSDO, who is here tonight with his wife Jan. I met Jim several years ago when he traveled all the way to the Sewanee Airport to meet me. I'll never forget his first words to me as he raced up to the plane. "Registration and airworthiness certificate, ma'am." Jim, I know that I speak for every aviator in this room when I tell you that these ramp checks keep our skies safer, and we're all so grateful for them. Later on, Jim brought me on as a designated examiner for the Nashville FSDO, and I enjoyed working with him in that capacity. I am happy he's enjoying retirement with his family, but we surely do miss him. I am grateful for my position as a professor, in which I have the freedom to combine my interests in mathematics and aviation and feel valued for it. Sewanee is more than a great job or a beautiful place to live. It's family, and that is evidenced by the fact that the Sewanee Vice Chancellor, Dr. John McCardle, and his wife Bonnie have joined us today to share with this honor. If Sewanee has touched you in a similar way, then you are part of our family too. After this event ends, I would like to get a photo of everyone who has any sort of a connection with Sewanee. Just look up for the purple and white flag on the side, please. With my aerobatic school, safety presentations, magazine articles, my mathematics and my aviation worlds combine. As much as I love flying upside down, I love even more helping people who don't fly more safely and feel more confident in their airplanes. Thanks go to the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association for giving me the mic and for saving a few pages each month so that I can share my safety message. I appreciate all the efforts on the part of the university, as well as John Foote and the good folks at Elevation for continually striving to make the most beautiful airport in the world even better. Thanks to Zach Colescott and the great people at the Winchester Airport for their hospitality on the days that I teach aerobatics or give check rides out of Winchester. I have a fabulous contingent of friends and family who support me every day and are excited for my induction. In particular, my sister Louise and her daughter Noreen, Michael, Emma, and Noah Moore, Chuck Knowles, John Wilcox, Addie and Keith Chapman, Carrie Downing, and many others are here today to share this honor with me. My friends Jim Parrott, John Tiller, and Greg Young were not able to attend, and they are greatly missed. I'm grateful for my sons, Jack and Pete, about whom I will share a story that shows the kind of people that they are. The flexibility in my jobs as professor, aerobatic instructor, writer, and examiner have allowed me to attend all of their sporting events, plays, award ceremonies, and such. But several years ago, I was scheduled to give a safety presentation in North Carolina on a Saturday morning. 2 days before, I learned that that same morning, Jack would receive a prestigious academic award at St. Andrews Sewanee. Now, as much as I love flying, my sons come first. I told Jack I would stay for his ceremony in a heartbeat, especially since his father wasn't able to attend either. He said he would be fine going on his own and encouraged me to keep my commitment. That Saturday morning, I realized that I had always knotted their ties for them, so I called them from North Carolina to find out how all that went. Jack said that instead of bothering me, he and Pete, in pure millennial fashion, pulled up a YouTube video, figured out how to tie their ties, tied each other's ties, and hitched a ride to the award ceremony. Pete is not able to attend tonight because he has the lead role in the school play at St. Andrews Sewanee. I saw it last night, and it's amazing. I am so, so proud of him. Jack, you and Pete are diligent, resourceful, honest, caring, and thankfully more receptive to parental guidance than your mother. Without you two, I would definitely not be standing here tonight. You are fine young men, and you show me how bright the future really is. I love you and thank you from the bottom of my heart. Congratulations to my fellow inductees, and thanks to all who have supported me. And thank you so much to the Tennessee Aviation Hall of Fame Board of Directors for this wonderful honor.
Colonel Billy Cox may well go down in history as one of the most beloved professors to serve in MTSU's aerospace department. Here is a brief look at Billy's life and his careers in both the U.S. Army and in higher education. Colonel Billy Cox was born in Rutherford County in 1935. He worked on the family farm, fascinated by overflights of airplanes from nearby Murfreesboro Airport. He joined the National Guard while in high school, and when he inquired about how to become a pilot, he was offered a flight in a Cessna L-19 Bird Dog. Billy enrolled in the ROTC program at Middle Tennessee State College in 1955 and was selected to be in the first ROTC flight class. He soloed a J-3 Cub in 1958 and he and another cadet bought another J-3 Cub to build flight time prior to entering the Army. When he graduated, he had a private pilot certificate and was commissioned an Army second lieutenant. After basic training at Fort Eustis, Billy was sent to Camp Walters, Texas, to complete rotary wing training. He flew the Chinook CH-21 and CH-47. During the next 20 years, Cox served 2 combat tours in Vietnam and single tours in both Germany and Korea. Among many other medals, Billy earned the Bronze Star, the Air Medal with 14 oak leaf clusters, and the Meritorious Service Medal. His 7,900 hours of flight time include 630 hours of combat flying. Stateside, Cox was stationed in 7 different states, including Tennessee. His connection to his alma mater remained strong, and when Billy returned to civilian life, he went to work at MTSU. He was assigned the formidable challenge of gaining FAA Part 147 approval for airframe and power plant maintenance training and establishing the associated degree programs. Billy Cox became a truly exemplary university professor, engaging with his students on and off campus, attending aviation events with them, flying with them, mentoring and motivating, always with a trademark positive attitude and winning smile on his face. He earned recognition as MTSU's Outstanding Teacher of the Year for 1986-87. Billy Cox served his community as a Kiwanis Club president, past president of the Airfield Owners Association, and EAA Chapter 419. Among numerous other accolades, he has received the Wright Brothers Master Pilot Award and is a current nominee for the Charles Taylor Master Mechanic Award. For extraordinary service and achievement in aviation for Tennessee, our nation, and the world, and for his service to our country, Lieutenant Colonel Billy W. Cox is inducted into the Tennessee Aviation Hall of Fame this 3rd day of November, 2018. Ladies and gentlemen, Colonel Billy Cox. Who do you want to hand this on to?
Here's my grandson, Blake George,
Very kind.
a young man we're very proud of, a product of MTSU Professional Pilot Program, now flying with Endeavor.
That's it.
And glad to have him to do this.
Hanging on.
Very proud.
Congratulations.
As I normally say, as we start a faculty meeting, and Dr. Maples is here, and I say, who called this meeting? Well, I know who called this one. A lot of people did. Where do I start? And I've named this in the military, I was talking about your tours. I call this my round trip tour because as you saw in the film there that I was born very close to MTSU college at the time, on the east side, probably within about 5 minutes walking distance. In a log home, in the days before electricity, my kids would start going on the table when I talk about old times. And shortly after that, my dad grew up in Halls Hill. Very few people know where that is. And then beyond that, another village called Trimble. Anyway, Dad wanted to go back home, Halls Hill area where he was born, and that's where I started farm work. And I guess the reason that I had an interest in maintenance and airplanes and tanks and so forth, my granddad ran the blacksmith shop in Halls Hill. But anyway, they were moving along on the farm. That was before the day of electricity, indoor plumbing, and telephones. And I think Halls Hill got electricity probably in the late 40s, I guess, and it was probably 2 more years before it got to Trimble, which is 4 miles away. But anyway, I got introduced to hard times. And this was in between after the Great Depression, beginning of World War II, and things were tough out in the country. But I'm very proud. It probably taught me a lot how to survive. So my interest really began, I don't know how many remember here, Camp Forest at Tullahoma. And they formed a training unit. And they trained all over Middle Tennessee and in the middle of our farm and everybody else's. And we'd see cubs, everyone was flying, and tanks were all over our property. I got to ride in the tank. And all these things looked very interesting, you know. And being an old country boy, I didn't know what I was going to do when I grew up. And my dad said, "Dad, son, you'll never grow up because you never get serious." I like that. So anyway, moving on along there. So it was time to go to school. Well, I went to Halls Hill Elementary for about 6 years. And we moved a little closer to Murfreesboro again and finished my last 2 years at the campus school, which now is, used to be was called training school. Everybody thought that was reformatory, a correction school, but it was a part of the university for teachers learning to be teachers. Finished there and went to Central High, Murfreesboro, and then I was probably thinking about going in the service because my two prior brothers, and the trend then, being country boys, they wanted to get out of the farm, away from the farm. And most of them, my two older brothers, volunteered to go in the service. Strange, always about 4 of them. The first brother went in the Marines, later the Air Corps, and then finally the Air Force. Second brother was the Navy. Well, I had to be different. It's the Army. So while in high school, my 3rd year, and my buddies begged me to get into the Guard with them. Probably the best move I ever made, because my military time started then. And I started out as a tank driver and worked my way up. And as it mentioned there, Earl Roberts, who just passed away in January, that's a well-known name in Murfreesboro because his parents ran the coal company there and things like that. But he was a young lieutenant, second lieutenant, and I was a young private. But at some point in time, we had a chance to talk, and he found out I was interested in aviation. And they had a little flight detachment there at the Murfreesboro Airport. He said, "Let me know when you're available, and we'll go for a little ride." And boy, was it a little ride. Went about 5,000 feet. He was going to see if he can prove whether I will be flight material or not, and immediately went into a spin, stalled in a spin. So how'd you like that? I said, "I got my breath back. That's pretty good. You want to do another one?" "Yeah, why not?" So we did another one. We did another one. We did another one. 5. He was bound to try to get me sick. Almost. And so he gave up. So let's go back to the airfield. What do you think of that? I think it's pretty good when I get my breath back. But anyway, so that was kind of the beginning, and I had thought about maybe aviation. Thinking back at the days of when the maneuvers were on the farm, and we come into town maybe twice a year to get school closed to start the new year, fall. The college had an airstrip, and there's a young man here that learned to fly on that strip. Aviation. We saw him early. Glad to see him here. But anyway, I would see this. He looked like he was going to crash because Halsdale Pike was at the end of the runway. So it looked like that airplane was going to come right through your car. But anyway, so that intrigued me to be able to fly. I flew on the farm because I had a tree that could get in. I made a facsimile there of a seat and controls and all. So that was my experience on the farm. But anyway, advancing on there, finished Central High, and I would have probably done the same as my 2 older brothers, go in the service, stay a while, get some GI benefits, and guess what? Of all people, Ike momentarily stopped the GI Bill. So I'm not going to go in and give them a time if I can't get anything out of it, and not thinking about a career. So at the time, my girlfriend, ever since campus school, and all through high school, she was going to college, and I didn't know how I was going to go. Well, you got to work to go. So I worked a lot, IGA food store and these kind of things. But anyway, moving on, managed to get through college. And the good part was that he mentioned the ROTC flight training program. And first 2 years at that time, at MTSC, mandatory for the males. And so me being in the Guard, well, this was mandatory. So then decision time, going into the junior year, to think about a military career and maybe go to flight school. You sign the contract for 2 years, and you got a whooping ton of dollars a month for doing that. But anyway, as it mentioned, and there's a gentleman here somewhere, Ernie Brothers, he was here earlier. He was in the class, it was 12 of us. And Jim Stone, who's not here tonight, but that was the first ROTC flight training class at the university. Okay, fast forwarding on through that, and then at time to graduate, and was commissioned second lieutenant in the Army in the Transportation Corps. And let me say your name. I know there's a lot of vets here. Thank you for the service. There's only 1 year that I served with an active duty. I'm getting my ahead a little bit, but Cherry Hill, Transportation Corps, and we had the opportunity to teach in the Military Science Department a little bit later on. So, but anyway, Jerry is here with us tonight. Okay, so after flight school, after basic school, immediately to flight school, as you saw there, Camp Walters, Fort Rucker, first duty station, Fort Ord, California. Seemed like every unit I got into, I didn't stay there long. It worried my dad, said, son, you must be doing a poor job. Well, like I say, from about 60, I went on active duty in April of 1960. Graduated in 59, I had about 3 months rather, to go on active duty. So anyway, after finish 4 years just basic transportation corps, I already had orders for my first duty station. And after the flight school, then my first duty station was, you had a dream sheet, and you put on what's your first choice and go on down. Well, of course, I put Fort Campbell. Well, I got Fort Ord, California, as far west as you could go. And had been there about 3 months. It just moved. I lived in Pacific Grove first, off post, got brand new quarters on base on Fort, and 3 weeks later I got orders for Germany. The Berlin buildup was really building up fast. So I spent about 6 months there, left my family back in Murfreesboro, because it was, at that time, no dependents allowed. And Billy Jr. was the only kid I had at that time. And while I was the first year, Aunt Teresa, the first daughter, was born while I was in Germany. Stuttgart, Germany, and I got a call from traffic control, and if I was on board. Yeah, well, be announced, let it be known, you have your daughter, Teresa, sitting over here, was born today, June 28th, 1961. I was in Germany. Okay, fast forward here. Finally got the family over there because things cooled down a little bit. I got the best location in Germany, Munich and Bavaria, and I got some excellent training at Fort Ord, desert training and mountain training. And didn't have many deserts in Germany, but the mountain training really came in handy. Anyway, so I got the family over there, and this is such a good duty, I'm going to extend for another year. Well, guess what? Vietnam was really booming, and it was trying to get all pilots back to the States. And I mean, I've heard of 11 Air Assaults was a test division, Fort Benning, and it was testing a new concept that everything in the Army moved by air rather than mules and horses, like in the old cavalry day. That's why it come up with that name. So finally, in early August of '65, they said we are trained enough, well enough, and that's somehow a matter of opinion, changed us to the 1st Cav Air Mobile with a deployment date about the 1st day of August of '65. And not to belittle the troops who went there prior to that time, because we had going in late 50s and so forth. And my stepson Bud here, Dad served in it. Up until '65, we were advisors normally to get involved in the battles. You're there to teach them how to fight a battle. Well, the Marines, of course, they got to be first, and I'm sure there's some Marines here, that they actually started the first, I always call it, we don't like to call it war, but conflict, and it was a 24/7 around the clock. I used to kid some of my buddies were there. Back to the advisors, at that time, maybe 3 months to 6 months, you'd get to come home. But then it started to be a 1 year after that. And it was a 9 to 5, I hate to say that, war until it became an advisor. So 65 on down until our previous presenter there. No, it was everybody for themselves, and hope you get back alive. But anyway, I don't know how many of you actually took the time to see the movie, We Were Soldiers. And it was about the Adrang Valley. There almost in Cambodia, a few miles east of Pleiku. And that was our first taste of combat. We lost several people. They lost several people. And if you were a pilot, particularly in the Chinooks, we didn't stop for about 4 days. Chinook primarily moved artillery batteries all around the clock, day and night, and then in the spare time, we hauled the dead out of the woods. Anyway, so many different battles after that, and came back to the state. If you're a pilot, you know, well, you're going to be in the States a short period of time, at least in the Army. So assigned to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, to get enough units in Vietnam. They formed several different Chinook units around in the state, and Fort Sill was one of them. As you saw in the picture there, I delivered the first Stage 47 there. I wound up being the commander of the maintenance company, and the sister company had the helicopters and the pilots. And we trained the maintenance people and the pilot crews, and then we helped them deploy to Vietnam, flying to California and through Stockton, where they'd be on out. We only accumulated about 32 violations during that flight of about 24 Chinooks, because by every farm, everything we could, and all those guys were going to Vietnam, and they could care less. But they finally, well, we'll let that go. Anyway, so fast forward again. Up to this time, I was only rotor wing qualified, but I already had my private pilot fixed wing. So I finally coached the Department of the Army and said, send me to a school. Because most pilots you didn't have time to go to school. But I did get the fixed wing transition at Fort Stewart, Georgia, and then went back to Vietnam, and this time commanded another Chinook maintenance company at Pleiku. On K is the name of where the first calf. Some of you may be familiar with that. And that's where they call the golf course, and the heliport was 1 mile square. And so the first calf was a very large unit. So I'm back in Vietnam. I had gotten promoted and wound up with another maintenance unit there in Pleiku. And I didn't fly too many normal operational missions if they short with pilots so big, but I was too busy doing test flying, and keeping enough airplanes for the mission. And one that I don't like to talk about, but it really helps to talk about this, I was getting ready to go recover one of our Chinooks over in Cambodia. I already had my flight helmet in my hand, arm, with all of my maintenance crew and 3 door gunners. And as I'm about to board the aircraft and say, let's go, we briefed everybody. The company clerk walked and said, you got to be at the colonel's office to discuss a very high demanding mission tomorrow and how many aircraft. I could have said, okay, I could have gone on and cranked the engine up and gone, but follow orders, I did. What's hard to talk about that aircraft and people never come back. And some of them we never recovered. I feel guilty. You know, that's typical, I guess, people that been in a situation like that should have just kept on going. My mission was ready to go, But the order was to report to the colonel, and I did. Del Cruel, W4, CW4, had about as many kids that I did. He acted as the officer in command of that ship. And another thing I hated, my first sergeant went too, because he had to get, they all, in the main, had to get 4 hours of flight a month. And they were trying to fill that in. Figure this would be a pretty simple mission, and get their time in and do their duty and get back. All right, so anyway, so 6 months, they moved me up to the battalion. We had every helicopter type in the inventory in the 52nd Combat Aviation Battalion. The Flying Crane, the Cobras, even had the Bird Dog, the only fixed wing that we had, because mostly everything was helicopter. Finished that tour of duty. Where next? Thought I'd go to the advanced course, because you start with the basic in your career field. Nope, we need you at Hunter Field, Savannah, Georgia. The largest aircraft maintenance brigade in the world at that time was formed there. So I go there as the company commander of a Huey company. And guess who we were training? We thought that South Vietnamese. I think most of them were, but I think some slipped through too. So commanded a company of 26 Hueys. And the other problem, not a problem, but a situation, so many people, pilots and crew members, where are we going, when you come back to the States, where are we going to put them and keep them occupied? Well, that company that I commanded normally is about 125, 130. How about 230? So what are you going to do with that many men and women, because women was coming into the system. So we actually ran 3 shifts and came up with every idea we could think of in sport and so forth, and managed, never had a major problem with them. So finished that one up, and so okay, now how about another, going to the advanced transportation school? Well, we're not going to send you back to Vietnam, and I had put an application in for my master's degree. Walked out. I had served with General Bill Smith. He had about as many kids as I did. Felt sorry for him. I said, well, we're going to get you out of the combat zone and go back to Murfreesboro, Tennessee. So we did. And in the aerospace education system. And that's where I met Randy Wood. Some of you may remember he was the department chair, retired Air Force. I like the Air Force because my older brother retired from the Air Force. But anyway, so went through that, and while I was there, did a lot of recruiting for the aerospace department. And I knew also, when finished the master's, I would stay there and teach military science at ROTC. So I'm back at home, and naturally the first thing they gave me, you go be in charge of recruiting. And that came from our headquarters with Fort Knox, and was assigned a 10-county area to recruit in. I would do a lot of it on my own with cadets. I always go with MTSU, because they're always going out in recruiting all the time. And so really did a lot of that. Finished that up. Now what time is it? Where should I go? Well, Korea wasn't really that hot at the time, but that's where I get assigned to Korea. At that time, our government was considering about the money that the military was costing it, the taxpayer. So the deal was, if you could, when I left that assignment here in Murfreesboro, and I did a short tour in Korea, because all my kids in different schools, and so I said, well, I'll take the short tour, and I was promised, the promises from the government, not bad math on them, that you'll come back if they can find you a slot back in hometown. Well, I got good news. I've been in Korea about 3 months. Hey, Billy, you're going to Smyrna, Tennessee, an advisor to the Army Guard there, their aviation unit. Well, our good friend Jimmy Carter, he had different ideas. It was time to cut back in slots and so forth. And I had been promoted to lieutenant colonel, and they demoted that slot to a major slot in Smyrna, Tennessee, with the Guard. So my advisor in DA searched and searched and searched, all the way from Huntsville. and Fort Knox was as close as I could get. Well, I wasn't going to move the family because we'd already built a home in '70 when I got the master's degree. And that matter of fact, that last 10 years, my family did not move. My last 3 never had to move. My first 4 did, and Billy particularly moved the most. Been in 4 or 5 schools in 1 year, different places. But he adjusted fast. But anyways, so Fort Knox, first duty assignment. This is where things were getting hot again too. If the balloon went up in 1976, about 4% of our fighting forces was coming from the Guard and the Reserve. So we had, of course, there were several different sections across the country, but Fort Knox was one of them. So Fort Knox was responsible for 4 different states, Guard and Reserve. And so I was an advisor to of all things, a chemical company, and also a transportation, pure transportation, like Jerry Hill's basic transportation. And that was about 1.5 years. It was entertaining, even more away from home, because I get to come home on the weekend. People, you mean you commute to Fort Knox? Well, once a week on the weekend if I'm not out with the units training somewhere. And they go to summer camp all over from Fort Carson, so forth. So I traveled a lot those about 1.5 years. Well, it was decision time. I was getting within about 1.5 years of I could retire, and looked at different options, and was also could have gone to the Apache. It was in the research stage and so forth. And it was lucky I was talking to an individual there. Fort Knox, there's more tanks there than anywhere else in the world. That's where the Abrams tank, the M1, was finally tested there in the facility that I wound up as the director of. So anyway, so that last 1.5 years became the director of maintenance there at Fort Knox, taking care of everything at Fort Knox other than the base engineering, so to speak, and 4 states that we had to support. A very rewarding job. I think it was 15 military, me and a sergeant major and a captain and 2 lieutenants, and 300 DACs, Department of the Army civilians. Some of the most professional people I guess I've ever worked with. And I still get letters from a lot of them there. All right, now it's not really decision time now. Of course, my family's still in Murfreesboro. Some of them out of school, going to college and this, that, and so forth. Big decision. I was filling that slot. I was filling a full colonel slot. I know the next thing I'll be going overseas again. And about that time, Randy Wood, who was the department chairman here in the aerospace department, and he gave me a call about early 1980. Said, hey, would you be interested in, if you decide to retire, to come back to MTSU and initiate a maintenance management program? Well, that changed my balance there, whether to stay or go. And with the family, size of the family and all, it's time to go back home and stay at home and not have to commute 3 hours away. And so I did, accepted the job. And the only thing we had at that time was approval from the Board of Regents to set the program up. I had that and a bunch of old military manuals and so forth. Didn't even have a classroom, and we finally begged Industrial Studies, which they changed their name again, and got a classroom there. And there's 2, and that first class was 5 students in there. 2 of them are here. Steve and Tommy Sloan. Everybody knows the Sloan name in Murfreesboro to motorcycle. Steve is now, he wasn't, maintenance manager wasn't available. I was just starting it. And he was about ready to graduate. I think he was aerospace admin. And went on it and got employed by the FAA in air traffic control. And I'm so glad he's here. And I think Tommy is here too. And Tommy was in that class, but he delayed a while before he finished out. But anyway, so that was the beginning. Teaching 2 other lecture classes and at the same time start building this program up. And I was going to show it, but so Dr. Maples over there, it is the FAA certificate. It took 8.5 years to finally get, we were teaching with all those graduates up until the fall semester of '89 was they could graduate, but they're supposed to get their A and P, but they did not. Okay, so fast forward, it's time to get down from here, that my next 10 years, there at the department, so many good things happened. Dr. Maples, he kept me, I kept him busy, he kept me straight, because there's a lot of things going on at the time, and I then finally retired there. Still taught part-time up until 2014, 34 consecutive years, and plus the 4 years of military science. So I wound up about 42 years on campus, so I'm back where I started then. I want to thank everyone, Bob Mentor. I was going to say something else about my wife, who is no longer with us. I called Bob about this time last year, and my wife had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and she really wanted to come to the gala last year, and it was down to the last day to call in. And I said, you know, I'm not going if you doesn't go. And Ken Franks was inducted, and he was my sponsor this year. He and Gail was going to be inducted. And so Linda picks up the phone, calls, and Bob answered. And Bob, we knew him because he used to come to the after honors and give presentations and so forth. And they talked a few minutes and said, give the phone to Billy. And Bob said, get yourself in here. Linda is not going, she's decided not to come. Her daughter, Sherry, came and stayed with her. And unfortunately, she only lived a month and 3 days after that. So anyway, thank everyone. Although that I was going to recognize a lot of people, it's too late. For 60 years in aviation, it's hard to cover in 15 minutes. I wish everyone the best, and the best of everything, and a safe, I want to say flying, drive them. I cannot wait to flying Monday morning. I'm flying again. Thank you very much.
Just a few weeks ago, this retired school teacher and pilot herself jumped out of a perfectly good airplane at 14,000 feet over Tullahoma. That's who Sue is, a high-energy, adventuresome lady who has carried the banner for aviation education a mighty long ways, and she isn't through yet. Sue McPherson has taught school since graduating from Lipscomb University in 1968. She earned her master's degree in education from Tennessee State University in 1978. From 1972 until her retirement, Sue taught in Sumner County at Hawkins Junior High and Hendersonville High School. At HHS, she chaired the science department. Ms. McPherson was honored as the Sumner County Teacher of the Year in 1989. Sue has had a lifelong passion for aviation and aerospace. She is certificated as a private pilot and has introduced countless numbers of her students to aviation. She served on the Sumner County Airport Authority from 1996 to 2005, was the CAP Sumner County Composite Squadron Aerospace Education Officer, served as director of the Space Exploration Science Camp at Vanderbilt Dyer Observatory from 2004 to 2010. She was the coordinator of Aerospace Days at Sumner County Regional Airport in 1998, First Flight in 2001, and the Centennial of Flight celebration in 2003, and is a board member and Aerospace Camp Director for the Bill Sadler Aerospace Education Foundation. She recently went skydiving, exiting the aircraft at 14,000 feet. Some of her many awards include the Krista McAuliffe Fellowship, 1989, Space Foundation Educator Award 2003, Tennessee Academy of Science Award 2000, and she was a Presidential Science Award finalist in 1989. Sue McPherson is a person of exceptional energy and endless curiosity. She has researched and studied rocketry, living in space, meteorology, physics, chemistry, astronomy, building satellites, the stars and planets, and the Hubble telescope. As an avid faith-based volunteer, she has participated in mission work in El Salvador, Honduras, and Peru. In 1999, she worked on a biblical archaeological dig in Israel. For extraordinary service and achievement in aviation for Tennessee, our nation, and the world, Mona Sue McPherson is inducted into the Tennessee Aviation Hall of Fame this third day of November 2018. And I give you Sue McPherson. Stand up here. A lot taller now.
Now I think I'm the tallest enshrined this year. Good evening, distinguished guests, Tennessee Hall of Fame founders and board members, friends, family, and the extraordinary men and women who comprise the aviation community. Thank you for this honor of induction into the Tennessee Aviation Hall of Fame. I'm both honored and humbled to be inducted into this legendary and accomplished group of prestigious winners. Special thanks to Chuck and April Duggar and Bob Minter, who nominated and advised me leading to tonight's gala. Chuck and April are in New Zealand visiting now, and we miss them deeply tonight. I'm an educator, I'm an explorer, I'm a lifetime learner. I will never cease to learn, to explore, and to teach about my adventures. The first flight I ever took was in a crop duster in the Mississippi Delta. My first cousin's friend took us up. During that flight, we did nosedives and loops and all kinds of creative things. Later, when I took my flight lessons, my instructor, Chris Park, said, "You do realize that many of these crop dusters probably don't even have their license." But nonetheless, he sparked that interest in aviation for me, as well as my father, who in World War II was actually a flight mechanic. My recent skydiving experience reminded me that there are still things on my bucket list. I haven't flown supersonically. I haven't gone wing walking. I haven't seen Mount Everest. There's a lot of places I need to go to see and things I need to do. It's really wonderful to be recognized for something you really, truly love. Education is my profession. I'm a retired public high school teacher. Presently, I teach adjunct classes at the Union University satellite campus in Hendersonville, Tennessee. My teaching style can be described as non-traditional. Learning should be fun with a wow factor. I call it a discrepant event. Why does nitrogen, a stable gas that we breathe, 78% of the air, when liquefied, confined in a bottle, it will explode? If you want to know why, ask one of our space campers from the 2 previous years, they'll probably explain it to you. And we have 2 of those folks here today. Victoria, who is really sold on aviation. She is a member of our Women in Aviation group. And Jared, who is also very sold on flying. And we're honored to have them tonight as well. A fundamental goal in my life has been to make a difference in my students. Consequently, I combine my love of aviation and my love of science. Aerospace, in my opinion, is the single most exciting subject that I taught. The mystic feel of flying in the air, controlling the aircraft, sitting in a pilot's seat, would thrill anyone that has any interest in aviation. I feel blessed to have helped many of my students to achieve that goal. I used to tell my students that the only way to get high was to fly an airplane. They have a perfect excuse, if they're ever offered drugs, to say, sorry, I'm flying today. Talk about being envied. How could you not be? And my very good friend, Gary Piper, in all his emails, he puts a little note. Teach your children to fly, and they won't have the money to buy drugs. William Butler Yeats described education as being a pail, as not being filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire. Teaching aviation and aerospace in high school, Civil Air Patrol, at Dyer Observatory, and at the Sadler Foundation Aerospace Camp, it has ignited a passion for learning and has influenced many lives to become airline pilots, commercial pilots, private pilots, to enter military academies, to go into scientific research, aeronautical engineering, and to enter numerous jobs in aviation and aerospace. I am deeply thankful to the people who have influenced my life. My parents, who taught me to work hard and to have integrity if I wanted to succeed. My sons, Sean and Kelly, and my late husband, Roman, who allowed me to pursue my dreams, even though it meant being away at workshops and in foreign countries, to learn all I could about aviation. My son, Sean, is a psychologist. He is the one who encouraged me to get my pilot's license. When my husband passed away, he said, "You must fill the void. Why don't you finish up your doctoral degree?" And I said, "Well, that's a lot of work." And he said, "Well, why don't you get your pilot's license? I know you've wanted to for a long time." So I did, and I've never regretted it. And that's one piece of advice that he's given me that I'm so grateful for. In fact, it's the best piece of advice that he's ever given me. Unfortunately, neither of my sons have the passion for flying that I do. But I'm not going to give up, because ultimately, at some point, I feel there's a little bit of me in both of them. NASA has had some wonderful workshops. I attended the NASA Educational Workshop for math and science teachers, and there I learned to network with other professionals and to get a new perspective on teaching and life. One of the friends that I met there is here tonight, Miss Gloria, and she and I have been friends for many years. We have presented at workshops, conferences, we have traveled through the world studying aerospace, and we're still very close today. In fact, she was helping last summer at the Sadler Aerospace Camp with me. When we were in Russia, I took a Tennessee flag and I asked one of the cosmonauts to please take it to Mir and to fly it on Mir. So I guess I had true collusion with the Russians, because they did. And they brought it back, and we have it. At this point, it's at Dyer Observatory, and we're looking at some different perspectives for it. We don't know exactly what we will do. I was so passionate about flying that I requested to teach a class at Hendersonville High School. At that time, there was no curriculum. So I had to apply to the state and write a curriculum. I had to appeal to the Board of Education to allow to teach this class. They finally consented. I was teaching a night class, 2 hours a night, for 3 days a week, which added to the other classes that I was also teaching. We did that for 2 years. The students were real troopers, and we learned a lot, and we had fun, and they did so well, they allowed me then to teach the class at Hendersonville High School. At that point, they actually gave me a textbook. For 2 years, I had written my own curriculum, own lesson plans, everything. I had no ancillary materials. I was pretty much on my own. They gave me a textbook. They also gave all the students a flight bag that was fully furnished. It was really incredible. At that point, I needed more, so I wrote the Krista McAuliffe grant. We got 4 simulators for my classroom. We also got money to provide flight lessons for the students. We also had enough money to have the B-17 and a DC-4 fly in, and we created aviation days for all the school children in Sumner County and all the citizens in Sumner County and everywhere around. They got to tour, they got to come in and talk and meet with pilots. They learned the logistics of flight. We were trying to inspire them to enter a field of aviation. And of course, flying is not the only thing you can do in aviation. There are many other jobs. The most difficult problem that I had was getting permission for these students to fly, because they considered it a risk. So I had to go before the board again and requested that these students fly. After I had talked at the board had one statement. Unanimously, they voted to allow the students to fly. Their only regret was that they were not able to get flight lessons too. We set guidelines as their grades, behavior, and desire to fly to use the flight time. 5 of the 15 students at one time or another became pilots. 2 were accepted into the Air Force Academy, and 1 later flew fighter planes. I had inspirational banners above my board in my classroom. One of them read, "Failure is not an option." Those were very famous words that were given by Gene Kranz during Apollo 13 when it had the crisis. Other inspirational banners were "You are the best," "Believe in yourself," "Dream," "Desire," and "Have a vision." I endeavored to make them believe it. However, most of the time, instead of reading the banners, they were very busy putting my erasers and chalk on top of the blackboard so I couldn't reach it. We had a lot of fun in my class. We made hydrogen, we prepared hydrogen, and we filled balloons, and we reenacted the catastrophe of the Hindenburg. The students loved it. We launched model rockets. We had field trips to Kennedy Space Center for shuttle launches, to the Alabama Space and Rocket Center, to weekend space camp. We went spelunking in Cumberland Caverns, and we had EAA Young Eagle flights. A favorite question that my students used to ask me every year, what are you going to be when you grow up? And I would say, well, it's not how big you are, it's how big you play. Of course, I would then tell them, well, I'm going to be a pilot, or I'm going to be an astronaut. Dr. Rick Chappell, who was an astronaut, research scientist, and director at Dyer Observatory, asked me to develop a curriculum for summer camps for teachers and students. So we mingled aerospace and astronomy. And a team of teachers worked on this, and we delivered workshops for teachers and camps for students. The camps for students is still in operation. A phone call from a very dear friend asked me for lunch one day. Janet Piper. This led to my present adventure. Janet shared with me a vision of the Sadler Foundation to develop an aerospace camp at Lebanon Airport for middle through high school students. Needless to say, I was very intrigued, and my first question was, how can I get involved? She discussed the plans, and I began to develop a curriculum for the middle school students. Guidelines for exception were to be recommended by a teacher and to write an essay. Why I want to go to camp. The camp is free. We feed them lunch and snacks. Then they fly with the Young Eagles on Saturday after the camp ends on Friday. Everyone who works with the camp is a volunteer, and we all love it. It's our passion. This year, in 2018, we had the junior camp. We also had a senior camp, and they took field trips. This coming year, we're going to begin our goal for the Sadler Aerospace Camp. This coming summer, 2019, the high school students will be instructed on how to build an airplane. So they're going to be learning the basics. This is going to be very exciting. The extraordinary men and women of the aviation community have volunteered their time, expertise in ensuring the success of this camp. We're deeply indebted to these dedicated individuals. If any of you would be interested in helping, we would be more than graciously accepting your willingness to do that. To fly, one must have faith in yourself, believe in yourself, faith in your airplane after you've had it checked out well, but most of all, faith in God. And I try to instill this in all my students. I never lose that thrill of taxiing down the runway, lifting off, and looking below at the earth. Through the headwind, I can almost hear God say, all is right with the world. Again, thank you for this very prestigious award, and God bless you.
Many of us who had the pleasure of knowing Ruth and Ferris have such great memories of them. They shared a love and passion for aviation that may never be equaled, except for the love that they had for each other. Both made aviation history in Knoxville and in East Tennessee. Ruth Lynn Wolfe was born in Strawberry Plains, Tennessee, October 28, 1918, and attended nearby Carson Newman College. Her first date with Ferris Thomas was a flying lesson in December 1938. She soloed June 30, 1939, and began teaching school in Dandridge, Tennessee, in the fall of 1939. Ruth and Ferris were married July 21, 1940. Ruth earned her private pilot certificate 18 days after she and Ferris married. The next day, she became a charter member of the Tennessee chapter of 99s, the International Organization of Women Pilots. Ferris and his friend Sonny Rising established Knox Flight Incorporated, the first general aviation business at the new McGee-Tyson Airport in 1937. He bought the business from Rising 2 years later. Business prospered, and he acquired a fleet of 9 aircraft. In 1941, he contracted to operate Island Airport and operated Knox Flight at both airports, but the war was hurting the growth of aviation. Ferris joined the Ferry Command in 1942 and was soon commissioned a first lieutenant in the Army Air Force. Ruth and Ferris were stationed at Romulus Army Airfield at Detroit. On May 14, 1942, she received a telegram offering her a position as an air traffic control trainee at the old Detroit Center. She is believed to be the first female air traffic controller. He instructed, was a check pilot, then began ferrying fighters and bombers to bases in the U.S. and abroad. About 2 years later, she resigned as an air traffic controller, moving to Ferris's new assignment in Presque Isle, Maine. He flew 27 transatlantic cargo runs in C-54s. In 1945, they moved to Hamilton Field in San Francisco, where at year's end, son Ferris Anderson Thomas Jr. was born. After the war, he flew routes across the Pacific. The Ferry Command ended in 1946, and Ferris was discharged as a major. They returned to Knoxville in 1946. Ferris continued to flight instruct and was chief pilot for Kern's Bakery for several years. He was a charter member of Knoxville's EAA Chapter 17. Ruth taught in Knoxville City Schools for 28 years, and she participated in 5 all-women cross-country air races between 1952 and 1955. Ferris and Ruth bought the property and developed Montvale Air Park, a flying residential community near Maryville. For extraordinary service and achievement in aviation for Tennessee, our nation, and the world, Ruth and Ferris Thomas are posthumously inducted into the Tennessee Aviation Hall of Fame this 3rd day of November, 2018. And I think Ferris's son, yes, there he is, will come and accept this for them.
Well, I'd like to thank the Tennessee Aviation Hall of Fame for honoring my mom and dad in this way. I thought it was really cool that a lot of sons of the inductees got to come up here and honor their parents. It makes me proud that I'm able to honor my parents the same way. If my mom was here, the first thing that she would say when she walked up here, half of them are women. That's what she would have said. And that's exactly the way she would have said it. What I'm going to do is to talk a little bit about some of the pictures that were flashed up there. I don't really have time to do all of them. They've all got a story. One of the first ones is showed my dad, Ferris Thomas, and Sonny Rising standing in front of a Cub. Sonny Rising taught my dad how to fly. And in October of 1932, 19-year-old Ferris Thomas soloed. 5 years later, when the Knoxville's McGee-Tyson Airport was moved from Knoxville out to where it is now in Blount County, Sonny Rising, that was in October of 37. a little bit later that year, or possibly the beginning of the next year, Sonny Rising established Knox Flight with my dad's help. And that became the first general aviation business there at the McGee-Tyson. Now, Daddy didn't have his commercial license at the time, so he really couldn't officially do anything. But what he did was, on a weekend day when there were a lot of people there, he would rent one of the Knox Flight airplanes all day. He worked out a deal to do that. Then he'd walk out into the crowds and he'd go, hey, I'd like to go for an airplane ride in that plane right over there. And then they'd sort of talk about how much money it might cost. So he'd pocket a little bit of money and he'd take them up for an airplane ride. Now, by the end of the day, he would have enough money to maybe to pay for the rental and the gasoline, or at least most of it, if not all of it. But the important thing was he had 5 to 6 hours of flying time. By the summer of '38, he did have his commercial license and was officially flying for Knox Flight as an instructor or whatever else was needed. In December of '38, Dad and Sonny Rising and Rising's girlfriend, Geneva Howard, they go to Rega's restaurant. And Geneva, the two men, they're talking airplanes, right? They're talking airplanes. And Geneva says to the waitress, where's that little one? Where's that little waitress? Seen her over here. So Ruth Wolf comes over, 4 foot, 10.5 inches tall, 20 years old, senior at Carson Newman College. And so Geneva introduces my dad to Ruth Wolf, and they talk for a couple of seconds, and finally Geneva goes, Ferris, aren't you going to ask her for a date? So the next Sunday, their first date was an airplane ride. Now, my mom wasn't one of these people who could, sit around and watch other people do stuff, and say, yeah, this is really nice. She was, she wasn't passive like that. She was one that wanted to be right in the middle of everything that was going on. I mean, she would be like, well, what's that? How does that work? Well, show me how to do that. Oh, I can do this. She was that kind of a person. So it's not surprising to me that airplane ride, that first date, turned out to be a flying lesson. By the summer of '38, Ruth of 39. By the summer, because that was in December of '38. By the summer of '39, Ruth had soloed. Now, another thing that happened in '39 is pretty significant. Rising was hired by what was then the CAA, now the FAA in Washington. So he sold all the planes except for 2. And so he went to my dad and he says, first I want you to buy these 2 airplanes and just take over the business, totally. So Daddy decided to do that. And over the next 2.5 years, beginning with those 2 airplanes, he had 9 airplanes. One of the airplanes that he bought was that Stinson trimotor that you saw up there. He got that in May of '41. On the weekends, it was used for airplane rides. At that time, people just would come out, and stand around and watch the airplanes and want to go for a ride. It was 10 passengers, so he was taking them up 10 at a time. And if it was a really nice day, they didn't even shut the engines off. Take one group of 10, come back, another group of 10, do that all day long. It's $1 a person. Well, for at least a little bit of a time, Knox Flight also used that trimotor for an airline service between Knoxville and Atlanta. And on one of those trips coming back, he ran into some weather, so he had to kind of detour around the weather. And he had to keep detouring around the weather and keep detouring around the weather. And finally, as he's coming in on McGee-Tyson Airport, he's beginning to wonder if he's even going to make it. He's doing some things to try to conserve a little bit of fuel because the gauges are down on the empty part. Well, as luck would have it, the engines quit. So he picked out a field. Now, this place is about 8 miles from McGee-Tyson Airport. And I went there a couple of weeks ago just to check it out, refresh my memory on the way it was. It's perfectly flat and level, big area. And I think it's a floodplain because a little river comes right around the corner of it. It'd be a perfect place to land an airplane. Now, the problem, of course, is most fields have barbed wire fence around them, even cross fences through them. So he stops the props, he picks out where he's going to land, and he kind of goes down a little bit, it turns, he gets lined up, and then he's thinking, you know, I should have turned center. This is going to be close. So he holds it off, and 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 he just gets the landing gear over that barbed wire fence. Now, no, that was conventional gear, remember? And then rip! The barbed wire rips the fabric off the bottom of the fuselage. So he stops the plane, and he unbuckles his seatbelt and gets up with a big smile. Well, we had a little problem. We ran out of gas. Now, we're not very far. The airport's just over here a little ways, and I'm going to go get some gas, and I'll be right back. And as you might guess, when he got back, the passengers were no longer there. Now, Ferris Thomas wasn't the only member of the Thomas family to have forced landings. Ruth Thomas had at least 2 that I know of. Matter of fact, I've got the newspaper account of one of them. This one was in August of 1941. In 1939, Mama became a school teacher, teaching in the Dandridge school system. Now, teachers get their summers off, right? So in the summer, she would hang out at the airport and do whatever she could do. Now, in this article, it doesn't say what kind of an airplane it was. It just says she was ferrying a new ship from the factory. Well, I know that Knox Flight was the Luscombe distributor. And every now and then, some of the boys would have to go up to the factory and bring some new Luscombes in. Well, this was great for her. This is some flying time. She could go up with the boys and bring a Luscombe back. Well, what happened this time is that when she switched from the reserve tank, from the main tank, fuel tank, to the reserve tank, the engine died. So she had to stop the prop, pick out a field, and land it. Well, they checked it out, and what they figured out was that the factory had plumbed it wrong. They plumbed it so that when she switched to reserve tank, she was actually turning it off. The second forced landing was quite a few years later. It was in July of 1967, and this was in her 120 Cessna. There were several pictures of it that went up there. Now, this time she was up around London, Kentucky. She had another lady with her. She's flying along, heading home, and all of a sudden the engine starts a very loud knock, bang, 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 and then it's losing power. So she turns the engine off, picks out a field, and sets it in. It turned out that one of the exhaust rocker arms broke on the engine. So I'm around at that time. When someone would ask my dad, or be talking to my mom and dad about that experience, what happened, and Daddy would explain it, then he would just shake his head and say, I don't know how she got that plane in that little bitty field. Now, one of the pictures that we saw here was Mama's 120, and it had a number painted on the side, and she's standing there in front of it. And The announcer said that she had flown, in 52 to 55, she had flown in 5 all-women cross-country races. That was for one of the races. Now, one of those races actually finished in Knoxville. She came in 4th place in that one. There were 2 others that she finished 3rd in. And one of those 3rds, she flew solo. In seeing some of the pictures here, it made me think. Mommy used to tell me, she'd say, you know, it's too bad you're not a little girl. Because if you were a little girl, you could go with me. And you could be my navigator. Because, I mean, even as a 6, 7-year-old, I was really good with maps. I was really good with maps. Matter of fact, I'm probably one of the few people here that came here without using a GPS. I don't even own a GPS. But wouldn't that have been cool to have been a little 8, maybe 9-year-old girl dressed in a little dress just exactly like your mom's, and to be able to fly across country in one of those things? Oh, that would have been cool. In 54, my dad started flying for Kearns Bakery. They bought a 170 Cessna, and he flew for them on an as-needed basis. Well, they got to where they were flying more and more, so in 55, they decided to hire him as their corporate pilot. And he flew for them for 20 years. They went from that 170 to several 310 Cessnas, and ended with a couple of 410 Cessnas. One of the 410s was displayed in the pictures there. If you could read what it said underneath the window, it said Bread Wagon 2. So it was probably the second of the 410s. Daddy had his own way of doing things in everything really, but especially in flying. He would not file an instrument flight plan unless he absolutely had to. And he would say, some people, they don't need to file it, but they're filing a flight plan. He was sort of old school, I guess. Another maybe pet peeve, and this one was sort of against his fellow corporate pilots. He would say, the guys with the faster airplanes, he would say, the guy will contact the tower, throttle back long before he needs to be cleared for landing. And the rest of us, we're circling the field, waiting on this guy to get up there so that we could go in and land. That was sort of a pet peeve of his, and I heard it more than once. So it happened to him more than once. So one day he's coming up the valley, heading for the McGee Tyson Airport. It's overcast, but, it's not a low ceiling. So he's flying underneath the stuff. This is one of those big Cessna twins, and he's just moving right along in that thing. When he gets to the place up near the airport where he thinks now is the time to throttle back, call the tower, get clearance for landing. Now's the time. So he throttles back, picks up the mic, but before he can push the button, a voice comes over the radio and says, "Farce, you're clear to land." Roger. In the mid-1970s, Mom and Dad both retired. I think Daddy retired first and Mama retired as a school teacher all those years, a year or two later. And then they set out to fulfill a lifelong dream. And that dream was to be able to walk out of the front door of their home, get into their airplane, and to fly wherever they wanted to fly. They found an old drag strip. I think it was about a half a mile paved perfectly straight, and then another quarter mile past that, still perfectly straight. It was on an old railroad bed. And they went in with three other people and bought it. And then they divided it up and sold to pay off the loan. One of the pictures showed the home, that home. That picture was probably taken in the late 80s, maybe the early 90s. That was their home at Montville. And you could see the airplanes were parked right out in front of the house. They lived the rest of their lives at Montville Air Park. And indeed, they did walk out their front door, get into their airplane, and fly wherever they wanted to go, whenever they wanted to do it. They flew to a 99s convention in Anchorage, Alaska. They flew to another one in Vancouver, British Columbia. They went to Nova Scotia and Prince Edward Island. And in 1977, Mom's 78, Dad's 84, they made a special trip to Michigan. I spent most of my working life in Michigan. I was an automotive engineer. I worked for Chrysler most of that time. My son, he was born in Knoxville, but he was raised in Michigan. So, at the end of May, 1997, my son graduated from high school. And my mom and dad flew up to see his graduation. They landed at Napoleon, Michigan, where there's a beautiful little grass field. Daddy said, wow, it was like landing on a mattress. It's mostly a glider port. A month and a half later, 2 o'clock in the morning, the telephone rings, and I pick it up, and it's my dad, and he's crying. His flying buddy of 58 and a half years had suddenly passed away. 3.5 years later, Ferris Thomas also passed away. Let me finish by saying this. When I was in my 20s, I don't know which end of the 20s, but somewhere along in there, one of my dad's brothers said to me one day, he said, hey, Andy, what's it like having a couple of teenagers for parents? Those of you that knew Ruth and Ferris Thomas, you know exactly what he meant. Those of you that didn't, just ask somebody that did, they'll tell you.
Just go and stand by that chair for a minute.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, give all these people a big hand for their efforts and their accomplishments in aviation. In your programs tonight, there are instructions on how you can nominate someone. I would encourage you to do that if you know somebody who's accomplished a lot in aviation. Nominate them, and the board will certainly take a look at that. The silent auction will be open 15 minutes after we close, so be sure and go bid on the things that you want, and but after 15 minutes it will be closed. And I will close with this. Oh, I have slipped the surly bonds of earth and danced on the skies on laughter-silvered wings. Sunward I've climbed and joined the tumbling mirth of sun-split clouds, and done 100 things you have not dreamed of, wheeled and soared and swung high in the sunlit silence. Hovering there, I've chased the shouting wind along and flung my eager craft through footless halls of air. Up the long, delirious, burning blue, I've topped the windswept heights with easy grace, where neither lark nor even eagle flew. And while with silent lifting mind I've trod the high, untrespassed sanctity of space, put out my hand and touched the face of God. Thank you for coming, and please come again next year. Thank you so much. And I forgot to say, the photographer will be here in front to take pictures of everyone and their families and so forth. So have a good evening. Thank you.